like to call to order the April 20th, 2017 meeting of the City of Bellingham Planning Commission. At this time, I'd like everyone to silence electronic devices. So cell phones, if you're typing away on a laptop or something, just please make sure the volume is turned off. Thank you very much. Heather, will you please call the roll?
Ollie Taishi.
Here.
Garrett O'Brien.
Here.
Steve Crooks.
Here.
Phyllis McKee.
Here.
Lisa Anderson. Here. Mike Estes.
Here.
Iris Motti Gibson. Here.
All right, everybody's here. So we will begin with approval of one set of meeting minutes, which Heather sent out, March 16th meeting minutes, and we just do these typically with a head nod. So if everyone's reviewed them, unless anyone has any comment, is accepting the minutes, we'll just, all right. So minutes have been approved. And so what we'll do before we get into our public hearings tonight, there's two public hearings tonight on two different rezones that are occurring in Bellingham. But before we do that, we always have a public comment period, which is for people to comment on any topic other than those topics that are tonight's meeting. So if you want to speak about anything other than the two rezones, please, this is your chance to come up and speak. It looks like we have at least one person. And just state your name and address, and then we'll give you a couple minutes to talk.
Hi, I'm Kate Blystone, 1600 D Street in Bellingham, and I'm here in my capacity as adjunct faculty for Western Washington University's Huxley College of the Environment. And I have with me 42 of the finest young people at Western. They're in my introduction to planning class, and so part of their job this quarter is to learn about how a planning commission functions. So they've reviewed item 1 on your agenda, and they're prepared to write a little report on it after you take action. So yeah, and it sounds like this meeting might be a little short, so if any of you want to talk to them afterwards, I'm sure they'd love to hear your perspective on what it's like to be a planning commissioner. So thank you so much for your time tonight, and they promise to be quiet, so if they aren't, throw stuff at them.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to comment on anything other than the topic of tonight's meeting? Anything at all? Now's your chance. Extra credit, maybe. Well, in light of your comments, Kate, just to give everybody like a quick background, we've done this occasionally, just about the Planning Commission. So the Planning Commission's an appointed body, 7 members appointed by the mayor. You serve a 4-year term. And we are a recommending body for the most part, so we don't make decisions on anything. We just receive a staff report on a project of any kind. Usually it's like a legislative action, like a rezone or a comprehensive plan component, chapter, maybe a change in the comp plan. And then we review that, we conduct a public hearing, and then we make a recommendation through a vote. And then that typically goes to the city council for a decision. Sometimes, depending on the type of project, it might go to back to the planning director for a decision. And sometimes when we have several subcommittees, well, one, I guess, the Shoreline Subcommittee. Steve Crooks is the chair of the Shoreline Subcommittee. And so if there's a shoreline permit, which is not typically legislative, it's more like an actual land use permit, then we make a recommendation. That subcommittee meets in a similar forum and makes a recommendation back to planning director. Yeah, so that's like an administrative decision. So that's kind of the background. It's pretty interesting, and I don't know what else to say about it. But I'm sure that if you want to talk to people afterwards, you should approach them, and they'd like to talk to you. So with that, we will close the public comment period and move into our public hearings. And we're going to do 2, and they're going to be taken individually because they're separate actions. So we're turned over to staff, and I don't know which one is first. So Moshe, you want to take it away?
Good evening, commissioners. Good meeting. Sorry. I just lost my place. And that happens sometimes, but I just want to say good evening to everyone here tonight. Tonight's proposal is for a rezone for the property located at 3001 East Sunset. The applicant is Jeff Quam. The property is located in Area 1 of the Barclay neighborhood, and it's approximately a little over 11,000 square feet. The applicant wishes to rezone the area to a commercial plan designation, and it is this area, this portion here. So just to give you a little bit of background on the proposal, the main portion of the property was annexed in 2016, and the city adopted comparable zoning for that area as commercial planned. The southwest corner of the property, which is the subject of this rezone, was actually incorporated into the city in the early 1900s and zoned residential single. So the only method to change that is through a comprehensive plan amendment and rezone. Both the Planning Commission and City Council adopted the proposal for review in 2017, and the applicant held a neighborhood meeting on January 10th, 2017. No one attended the public meeting, and there was no comment in regards to the proposal. A SEPA non-project determination of non-significant was issued on March 3rd, 2017, and as well there was no comments on that determination. So the current issues with this property is currently it contains two zoning designations, one of residential single and one of commercial plan. It's also located in two different sub-areas. So having two different zonings governing the property creates several different inconsistencies in zoning and development of the property. So here's an aerial view of the property, as you can see here, and this is the portion that's subject for the rezone, right in this area here. And what's important about this rezone, and not taking into account any environmental constraints, is that in order to develop the main portion of property, there would be additional zoning regulations placed on that development for increased setbacks, could be limits on height, as well as setbacks for parkings that are greater than what they would normally have to provide. As well as we're also looking for a pedestrian-oriented style of development, and that would push development further back on the main portion of the property. So when petitioners petition for a comprehensive plan amendment and a rezone, they have to meet specific criteria that's identified in Bellingham Municipal Code 20.20.040, as well as the rezone criteria in 20.19030. The proposed amendment meets all the criteria for a comp plan amendment and rezone. It implements the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan as addressed and stated in your staff report. The proposal would enable the property owner to develop the property under a single zoning commercial plan designation. It corrects an inconsistent zoning boundary that was created in the early 1900s. It simplifies development regulations not only for city staff but as well as for the applicant, and it improves development options, and it would promote the efficient use of the land for that area. So staff recommends the commission approve the proposed rezone request, and that ends my presentation. It's a little short, but it's not too complicated.
Thank you, Moshe. Before we will have public comment opportunity, but before we do that, just if there's any technical questions or questions of that nature from Planning Commission, typically we'll take technical questions now and then save like discussion for after the public comment period. So if anybody has any questions about Moshe's presentation for him, feel free at this time. Seems pretty straightforward. You're off the hook.
Well, thank you.
So again, before we discuss, I think we should just open up the public hearing and have that opportunity so that we hear feedback from the public. So we'll have a public hearing on this topic. It'll start now. And the way this works is if you want to talk about this particular topic, you can come up to the mic and you get 3 minutes to speak and just state your name and address, and then we will hear your comments. And if anybody else wants to speak after the gentleman who's in line, then just come on down and kind of stand against the wall. And there's actually one other person on the list, Rob Bartell. So Rob, why don't you go first since you signed up, and then Jeff, you can go after that, if that's okay. Thank you.
Good evening. Rob Bartell, 3208, 3212, and 3220 East Sunset Drive. I'm the owner of Connection Speech Language Pathology, which is just slightly to the east and across the street. So I encourage the correction here. I've been trying to deal with conditional use and using my property as a commercial business, and it's been very, very difficult on the state highway in the urban growth area, being annexed, all that over the years. So I definitely understand where imaginary, well, not imaginary, actual lines on a map really make a huge difference, but when you go out there and you look at the site, it certainly makes a lot of sense what they're doing in developing that. So I would love to see some real development there. I've lived there about 20 years, and it's a prime location to be developed. I'd like to be able to walk over there and have a little more of a dynamic, pedestrian-oriented center as opposed to the car-centric stuff that we have there now. So with that, encourage you to consider this and support it. So thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Jeff?
Hello. Jeff Quam, 1651 Kelly Road, Bellingham. I'm the applicant for this zoning amendment, this comprehensive plan amendment. As staff explained, it's a kind of a quirk. Back in the 1900s, that southwest corner was cut off, and in 2016 we ended up getting, which I was also the applicant for, the annexation for that 163 acres. And that was approved, and that ended up creating for the bulk of our property planned commercial, and that southwest corner was residential single, so that was not a very good fit. So I just want to say that for the record that I approve of the staff's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Pardon me. Is there anybody else in the audience who would like to comment on this proposal? Okay, seeing no one, we will close the public hearing portion of the meeting, or of this topic, and open it up to Planning Commission discussion. Is there anybody who has any other questions or any discussion at all related to this? Seems pretty straightforward. All right, well, there's no discussion. Is there anyone who has a motion?
Will you do these individually?
Yes.
I'd like a motion to support the proposed comprehensive plan amendment and rezone request for the portion of property described as 3001 East Sunset and shown in the April 20th staff report.
Second.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second. The motion was to support, recommend approval of the rezone as shown and as described in the staff report dated April 20th, 2017. Is there any discussion on that? I'm guessing no. Oh, Steve, yes.
Yes, I had a chance to view the property, and it just makes absolutely no sense to keep the single resident zoning as it is right now.
Yeah.
It should be combined with the rest of the parcel. So I'm going to support the staff recommendation.
I agree. It's a funky quirk, and it's easy to see the consistency with the criteria in the two sections that Moshe that you cited. Any other discussion? Iris, yeah.
I was excited to see this come up as well. Knowing a lot of people that live along that highway and in a lot of the new developments in that area, I think it will hopefully provide some sort of pedestrian-friendly opportunity for folks to enjoy whatever commercial development comes there.
Thank you. All right. Seeing nobody else, I think we will have a vote. So the motion restated is to support the staff proposal, recommend approval of the rezone as shown and described in the April 20th, 2017 staff report. So all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, and that passes 7-0. Thank you, Moshe. And with that, we will move to the second item, which Mr. Ryan Nelson is going to present to us. Ryan, do you want the lights? Do you have a...
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Good evening, Planning Commission and City of Bellingham, Western Washington University students. I'm Ryan Nelson with the Planning and Community Development Department. I'll be presenting the 4260 Pacific Highway Comp Plan Amendment and Rezone Proposal. So the subject proposal involves rezoning a portion of property that is currently zoned residential single to industrial plan zoning. It's located in the northwestern portion of the city, kind of out just north of the new Costco site. So a little bit of background on this site. It was annexed into the city in 2013. Both the Planning Commission as well as the City Council have docketed this specific rezone and comp plan amendment for review in 2017. So this is something that our legislative bodies have already seen from a preliminary standpoint. In December 2016, the applicant held what's called a neighborhood meeting, and that's kind of the first step in any type of application review process, where all property owners within 500 feet are invited to meet with both the city and the applicant to go over their proposal. We did not receive any comments specifically from the neighborhood meeting nor from the public comment period associated with the public hearing. One neighbor did attend the neighborhood meeting. They didn't express any opposition or specific concerns to the proposal. And the city has issued a SEPA determination of non-significance this year. So some of the issues associated with this particular site. Again, this is one property that contains two different zoning designations, a residential single and an industrial plan designation. The subject site in this case has significant limitations associated with critical areas surrounding the site, has wetlands on the subject site and within the immediate vicinity surrounding the site, as well as the Bear Creek Fish and Wildlife Habitat Conservation Area adjacent to the east of the site. There are also some limited access components to the subject property. It currently has an access point from Pacific Highway through the adjacent property that fronts on the Pacific Highway back to the adjacent property that is zoned industrial, as well as onto the property that is partially zoned residential. So this exhibit really does a great job kind of showing what we're looking at with this particular rezone. There's kind of a lot happening here. Our subject proposed rezone is right here. Immediately south of the subject site is the city's stormwater regional facility. Immediately north of the site is our two actual wetland mitigation sites. One proposed for mitigation from the city stormwater regional facility. The other proposed for future development and mitigation associated with future development. In addition to that, you can see from a critical area report that was provided by the applicant with the subject comp plan amendment or rezone, approximately 3/4 of the subject property is limited by wetlands and their associated buffers, and so it really just preserves a small portion of the subject property, creating kind of an island of residential surrounding residential zoning, but not necessarily residential uses. Some of the challenges associated with developing this subject site from the applicant's perspective is if they were looking at developing it for residential single purposes, they could possibly get about 16 units there. But in order to do that, the city ultimately would be forcing a subdivision in order to bisect those zoning district boundaries, and they would be required to develop June Road from Pacific Highway down to service the site, which would be a significant infrastructure improvement, would have significant impact to adjacent critical areas and their associated buffers. And from staff's perspective, we perceive that that would very likely be something that could result in the property remaining vacant into the far distant future from an economic standpoint. So staff has reviewed the proposed comprehensive plan amendment and rezone for the applicable criteria in the municipal code. And based on the applicant's materials submitted in staff's analysis, we have determined that it does comply with those applicable provisions. So this proposal would promote a logical expansion of the industrial zoning. It'd help encourage economic development and also retain or support industrial jobs. It would enable the property owner to develop the property under a single zoning classification. So as Moshe specified, when you have different zones next to each other, they can create some challenges in terms of required yards, required setbacks, required development specifications that can limit the use of the subject property. So in this particular case, there's very limited potential for the site given the underlying zoning. With the subject proposal, this would allow them to eliminate some unnecessary development regulations in relationship to the subject property. This particular site provides an excellent buffer between the both planned and residential areas through the critical areas, their associated buffers, and the conservation easements that are in place. Ultimately, when we review these zoning proposed changes, we look to our comprehensive plan for goals and policies that will help support or not support a proposal. In this particular case, one of the really resonating components was that it really does allow for the maximum use of the subject property. And so we really look to both our land use element as well as our economic development element to identify specific goals and policies that helped encourage maximizing the underutilization of this particular piece of property. So with that, staff recommends approval of the rezoning request. I would like to add that we do propose one minor change before we take this to City Council, and it's really just a technical change under the table of zoning for the Coronado neighborhood for both areas 20 and 21. It identifies Division Street as a needed arterial collector throughout this area. Division Street has been renamed to Mahogany Street, so we'd just like to clarify that so that there aren't any misconceptions in the future. And with that, are there any specific technical questions that I can answer now?
Thank you, Ryan. Steve?
Yeah, in looking at the proposed area, first of all, let me just say it's nice to see us restoring some industrial areas. We need it in this particular area. Second thing is, as you look at your drawing, where is access? How do you get access? From the drawings, it appears that this is totally landlocked, a piece of property.
So in terms of access to the subject property, there's two scenarios. There's, under the current zoning, the only opportunity for access would be through the June Road right-of-way all the way to this vicinity, and then developing a secondary street down to the subject property. But as you can see from the different layers in this exhibit, there are significant wetlands and associated buffers within that area. Under the proposed rezone, there's currently an access point that runs through this property here that services the subject site. This was a prior fill site permitted in Whatcom County, so there is an established access point through there, and that would allow the connectivity to this adjacent property should it be rezoned to planned industrial.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Anybody else? Okay, I think you're good. Thank you. Okay, so just like last time, we'll have a public hearing component or public comment component where we'll give anyone an opportunity to speak. And one individual did sign up. Ron, do you want to speak? And if anybody else would like to speak after Ron, then just come on down and line up against the wall.
My name is Ron Jepson, engineer, 222 Grand Avenue, representing the applicant. As it was said, prior to this time, in 2006, when this property was in the county, it was a permitted fill site, and a lot of the material from the airport expansion went to this particular site. The access is from Pacific Highway, and there is a bridge, a metal bridge there now that will be replaced with the new development contemplated. But it's almost and somewhat similar to the last presentation in that we have one ownership with two zones. It's a 20-acre parcel, and the west 10 acres is zoned industrial, and the east 10 acres is zoned residential. So that artificial line, the zoning line, adds complications to the use of the industrial property. For instance, the setback from a residential zone is 20 feet. So any industrial use on his own property to the west would have to set back from this particular zone line. Also, when it was in the county, the fill permit expired, and the depression that we experienced, there was no projects requiring fill to be disposed of. And so we initiated in 2011 in the county a reinitiation of a fill permit. And we did get a fill permit, but it was only good for 6 months. And it was awarded in October through March. And there's not much filling in this county during that time span. So it expired. But in the meantime, it became city property. And so we decided, the owner did, to go ahead with an industrial type of development. When it was in the county, most of the green area that you see in the single-family residential area was converted to a conservation zone. And that was done to more or less minimize some of the buffering and the buffer widths that the wetlands that you see triggered. So now, realistically, the 10 acres you see there has maybe 2.5 acres of usable residential. By the time you would put a detention pond in that, with all the requirements, maybe 10 houses could be located there. But right now, staff's interpretation is that no uses on the industrial property can be supported by anything on the other 10 acres that the fellow owns. For instance, if we want to fill in the industrial part, that fill cannot really extend into the single-family area because it would be, in effect, supporting a use that's not allowed in the single-family zone. So it's important that we make it all one zone. It has been indicated that it is landlocked, which it is. The stormwater pond to the south and the wetland mitigation to the north doesn't need June Road to be developed. And the city pretty much has decided that the June Road right-of-way, which actually extends from Northwest Avenue to Pacific, probably would never be needed.
About 30 seconds, Ron.
Pardon?
About 30 seconds.
Okay. And that is because largely is mahogany, which is the arterial being constructed behind Costco, would be a very good link between Northwest and Pacific. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this particular topic? Okay. With that, we will close the public comment portion of the public hearing and have any planning commission discussion or questions. Lisa, and then Iris.
I just want verification of what I assume to be true. With the county having designated that section as being conservation buffer, if this gets rezoned, that would still remain the same, correct?
Staff anticipates that under a proposed development of industrial use on the site, they would be required to obtain a plan development permit, critical area permit, SEPA review. Throughout that particular process, we would anticipate that likely our conservation easement the existing conservation easement would need to be modified to comply with current city rules and regulations. So I would suspect that the conservation easement boundary would change to adapt to our current rules and regulations regarding critical areas.
So would there be a reduction? Do you perceive the possibility of reduction, expanding more area for industrial?
I suspect that it quite likely could go the other way, where we likely would have more property potentially in a conservation easement. There are some challenges to the site, and currently at this point in time we don't have a specific development proposal forward, so there will be some challenges in terms of averaging and reduction of buffers potentially to utilize the optimal portions of the subject property, which very likely could result in increased conservation easement on the subject property to help mitigate for those impacts.
Thank you. Iris, do you have a comment?
I have a few questions, and pardon me if some of them are rookie questions. But one of them was about the potential. I was wondering if there was any concern about noise pollution for the residential single-family zoning area if something industrial was to be built in the requested area that would have less of a buffer.
That's a good question. So as I stated, very likely through development of the subject site for an industrial use that will, given the size of the property, I anticipate that the SEPA, State Environmental Policy Act thresholds will be triggered, in which case we'll have an opportunity to look at the specific proposed use on the site and determine whether or not there needs to be mitigation associated with that particular use. The component here that maybe doesn't show in this exhibit is the size of these properties. And so when you look at the particular critical areas, their buffer, and then you start looking all the way over to Bear Creek, which is east of the subject site, it's a pretty significant amount of area, and it's a fully vegetated, treed buffer. So I anticipate that very likely, just given the benefit of the critical areas in this particular case, that'll very likely provide an adequate buffer between the particular uses.
Okay, thank you.
Ryan, is there a development, is that piece to the east of Bear Creek the one that's subject to large development plan?
Yes, I understand that an application's been submitted for a development proposal for residential on the eastern portion of the property. And it would be a significant number of residential units.
Yeah.
I want to say between 400 to 500.
Thanks. Anybody else? Garrett?
So if this is part of a planned unit development, is it could be one contiguous parcel?
So it wouldn't necessarily be a planned unit development, it'd be a planned development permit. And so very likely under a planned permit, there wouldn't be an actual subdivision. And so it would just be one subject property owner owning the entire property. The planned development boundaries could depend upon zoning. For instance, if a planned development permit was submitted now, it would only be allowed for the subject property that's currently planned industrial. Should the applicant decide to move forward with the proposal prior to completion of the comprehensive plan amendment, we could anticipate a future either amendment to the plan permit or an additional plan permit. Does that clarify?
Yeah, I was just thinking if there wouldn't be any easements required, then if this is rezoned, it just becomes one parcel.
Correct. It would just become one parcel. The particular easement of concern would be access to the Pacific Highway, and there currently is a recorded utility and access easement between the adjacent western property.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Do you want to field the motion on this one as well, Lisa?
Just a quick comment. I will be supporting this because I know property is very important for housing, and I hate the thought of losing single-family neighborhood housing, but I think this is appropriate given the location, but weighing single-family versus industrial and jobs. I have a lot of concern about us having adequately, employment-based property. If we were looking at doing commercial instead of industrial, I don't think I would be that for it, because I think we have a lot of commercial property available. But I think given that this will move to industrial and hopefully provide some jobs in Bellingham, I think it's a good move.
Thank you. Any other comments? Iris?
Another question, is there, in this area, in the Cordata neighborhood and areas closer to the airport, is there any limits to industrial building based on the proximity to the airport or challenges?
That's a good question.
Can you restate that? I'm not sure I understood.
Being so close to the airport, is within those neighborhoods, are there any particular regulations around building for any use that that would hinder the potential for development?
Not that I'm aware of. What I suspect is, given the proximity to the airport, likely that's why this property was zoned industrial, both in the county as well as in the city, to provide some proximity between the two. There is no language within the Cordata neighborhood plan or under the specific zoning that speaks to that specifically. But that's a good observation in terms of the proximity to the airport. I think that was one of the components that staff looked at in terms of the challenges associated with residential development so close to both industrial property, I-5, and the airport create a bit more of a compatibility between the proposed industrial versus the prior or existing residential.
That's a good point, Ryan. Having houses that close to the freeway is not or the airport's not a good idea. Iris, I did work on a project once that was in proximity to an airport. It wasn't Bellingham, and the FAA does look at the height of any structures and lighting. Like they're going to look at building-mounted lighting that might project upward, and then not that an industrial building would probably be tall enough to cause a problem, but like if you had like a radio tower associated with it or something, they'll look. Those are two things I think the city code doesn't have anything on, but maybe through SEPA, FAA would pick up on that.
Also, that they wouldn't want to see any uses that put, for instance, smoke up into the air,
Yeah.
that it could obscure visibility.
Or maybe glare. I don't know, if, like building roofing. Anything else? Someone want to make a motion?
All right, I'll move to approve the comprehensive plan amendment and support the rezone request for property located at 4260 Pacific Highway.
We have a motion.
Second.
I have a second. So we have a motion and a second. The motion is to recommend approval of the rezone request for Area 1, or pardon me, Area 20, the Cordata neighborhood, consistent with the staff report April 20th, 2017. Do we need to formally, before we finalize anything, do we need to formally address the Division Street to Mahogany Street change, or is that like a Scrivener's thing that you can change when you go to council?
Correct. That's an error, or that's a modification that we can change prior to council. I just wanted to notify the commission of that
I think
particular
we're
change.
all totally okay with that, I'm assuming. So, yeah, just feel
Thank
free
you.
to make that change.
Thanks for the clarification.
Is there any discussion on the motion? Well, I would just like to comment that I agree with both Steve and Lisa's comments about the industrial land component. It's rare that we see someone want to rezone residential to industrial, usually because of the financial component of that. And so, I know that we do have struggles with the supply, as you noted. So I also am super supportive from that context, that it's good to see industrial lands added. And even if they don't get that much out of that specific area, if it facilitates better use of the currently zoned industrial portion. So I think it's consistent with all of the applicable criteria. And with that, let's have a vote. So all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay. So that passes as well, 7-0. Thank you, Ryan. And with that, we will close the public hearings component of the meeting and we just have a little bit of business left. Basically, talking about the next meeting, right, Greg? I mean, is there anything else that you want to present to us?
I just have one item. Phyllis had asked about Lydia Place and the rezone that this commission recommended approval of last year. The council agreed and they approved the rezone. Lydia Place has been issued permits for the first phase of their expansion, which includes a second story over the existing offices, if you're familiar with the site. They're still looking for funding for the additional units that would go on that site. Part of the funding will come from the city, but just because of the timing, that didn't work out this year, but they'll be looking for funding to do the expansion project, hopefully next year.
So nothing has actually happened? Nothing has taken place yet?
Nothing is, I don't believe construction has started, but the permits have been issued.
Did they include, I believe we recommended additional supervisory residential individuals on the property?
Right.
Is that anything happened with that?
It hasn't because they're not to that point yet. What they are currently building is a second story over the existing offices, 4 offices. They haven't even started on the second building, which would be the new residences. But that will be a component, yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
That's all I had.
So, just real quick before we wrap up, next meeting is May 4th. So in a couple weeks, it's a work session, amendments to the commercial code. And so that's, I think, that there was a presentation done to the Planning Commission in the mayor's boardroom on that. Was that, do you remember that? Was that to the full Planning Commission? I think so.
I think Rick came and talked to you about it.
Rick maybe spoke, I thought Elise gave a presentation to us.
Yeah, as part of the class.
So, yeah, so that
Can
was.
you find out when that was so the newbies can...
Just in case, yeah, if you want to. I don't know if it was in the mayor's boardroom. I don't know if it was taped or not. But
Maybe not. Well, we'll check.
Yeah, there was just in case, and you could, Heather, if you could send it out if you want to watch it. It was a brief presentation on the background of what I understand now. This is like more towards implementation of those recommendations. So that'll be interesting. And that's the only item on that meeting date. Anybody else have anything? Heather?
The presentation was on July 21st of 2016, and it's audio recorded,
Okay.
and it should be on Sire.
You know what? She also did a presentation to council, which I attended in this chamber, which might be video recorded. That might be nice. That actually was a more in-depth presentation. That might be one to get the date out for.
And I think that was a couple of weeks before.
A couple weeks prior.
Yeah.
I think you're right. So I remember that one. She had slides up, and it might be good to check out. So thank you, Heather. All right. With that, we will adjourn. Thanks for coming, everybody, and go enjoy the sunshine.